house labelled Guantanamo Bay. PSYOPs aren't supposed to be torturers, they're supposed to basically be leafleters. Here's a typical PSYOP leaflet.
Nobody benefits from the use of weapons of mass destruction. Any unit that chooses to use weapons of mass destruction will face swift and severe retribution by coalition forces. Unit commanders will be held accountable if weapons of mass destruction are used. But as you can see, it clearly links an unfulfilled need on their part with a desired behavior on our part. Their unfulfilled need is they don't want to face severe retribution. And our desired behavior is don't use weapons of mass destruction. Well, they didn't, so this may very well have been effective, but it's certainly possible that this influenced a lot of people not to use them.
Then I was bustled out of the conference room and into a wood-lined office.
There you are. I'm Colonel Jack N., middle name, Jack N. Sumi. I'm the commander of the 4th Psychological Operations Group, Airborne, Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
I asked Colonel Sumi about the musical torture, and he said he didn't know much because he was new, but he was sure it wasn't PSYOP's idea. He said PSYOPs were co-opted because they were the ones with the CDs and the loudspeakers.
We are always in support of the commander. And the commander is, the senior commander, the maneuver commander, or an area commander is never a PSYOP officer. We are always a support force. So when we attach that PSYOP force to that commander, he may identify a use of psychological operations loudspeaker capability for that very reason. If we have combat forces in the field, I would rather see our PSYOP capability being used to support those combat forces as opposed to some other mission like you kind of outlined.
The colonel wouldn't say who gave the order to torture people musically, and he said he had no idea why Jamal was played Chris Christopherson at normal volume in Guantanamo Bay. When I asked him who invented the technique, he said he didn't know that either. But after 3 years of research into the history of these experiments, I think I have pinpointed the culprit in the hills above San Francisco. It's as much a surprise to him as it is to me. It's this man.
Little sounds that just kind of go right through the center of the brain. So I am relaxed. Free flow of ideas come to me now. I enjoy being creative. And then we'd mix that down so I enjoy being creative. I am relaxed.
In the late 1970s, Stephen got a covert and entirely out-of-the-blue visit from a lieutenant colonel. He said he thought Stephen's music might bring about world peace, but Stephen was paranoid about the whole thing.
Would this be a question of aiding and abetting the, quote, enemy? And on a larger level, though, it's for my country. Another level, it's for the world. And world peace, you know, it's hard to be against world peace.
So your initial thought was, you know, this man is from...
to be used in the wrong way.
The lieutenant colonel cross-questioned Stephen about the psychic power of music. But beyond some vague talk about world peace, the lieutenant colonel, who said his name was Jim, didn't give much away about his intentions. Did Jim tell you what he wanted to do with this information?
Oh, no.
Did you say to Jim, I'm paranoid that you've just approached me, you're a military person who I don't know?
I probably joked a little something about that. And that was when he said, feel my energy. And, you know, just, you know, look in my eyes and just feel. I mean,
did he say that? You know not to be paranoid with me because you can feel my energy?
There was something along those lines.
And so, although the whole thing was weird and unexpected, Stephen was left with a good feeling about the lieutenant colonel called Jim.
Once or twice over the last 15 years, his name came up. And we wondered whatever happened to that.
Who was the lieutenant colonel called Jim? And how did this turn into this? This is Jim.
So come on in. Come into the play. Come into the sacred play zone. And I might even invite the wind, because out here the wind will come if you ask it to. Do you believe that?
We have met Jim before in this series. Why are you unlike my mental picture of a lieutenant colonel in the US military?
Because you haven't seen many. Yeah, the only reason that you have a funny picture of us is because you've been watching too many movies made by people who don't know anything about it.
It was Jim who realised during Vietnam that his men were being killed because they impulsively and kind-heartedly fired high, missing the enemy.
I find that the kind of human being that is attracted to military service has a great deal of difficulty being cunning.
And it was Jim who, with the Pentagon's blessing, journeyed into the New Age communities of California in a quest to learn cunning, which is where Stephen Halpern taught him about the psychic power of music. When Jim returned from his Californian odyssey, he wrote this secret military document. In Jim's First Earth Battalion, soldiers would carry baby lambs into hostile countries. They would greet the enemy with sparkly eyes and an automatic hug. Soldiers would attain the power to pass through objects, sense plant auras, stop their own hearts with no ill effects, and kill goats just by staring at them. But Jim's manual wasn't only about harnessing the power of the paranormal. It also suggested psychically mind-changing the enemy by blasting them with subsonic frequencies and acid rock music out of sync. Before Jim came along, military music was all about pageantry and energizing the troops. In Vietnam, soldiers blasted themselves with music to put them in the mood for battle. But the idea of the military using music to psychically mind-change the enemy, that was Jim's idea. Knowing what you know about the legacy of the First Earth Battalion and how pervasive it is in the military today, that thing I just told you about what was happening in the containers, could that have happened because of the First Earth Battalion?
Sure.
Now at PC World for only $699, the StereoPix PC from Fujitsu Siemens Computers with an Intel Pentium 4 processor with HT technology 3.2 GHz. Massive power and performance for all the family. A recordable DVD for creating and copying your own movies. 128 meg graphics for red-hot gaming. And a 17-inch TFT monitor. We've never seen so much for so little in a top brand PC. So hurry, it's only $699. PC World.
Benacol yogurt drink. Just 1 pot a day is enough to lower your cholesterol. Benacol, proven to reduce cholesterol. Try new strawberry flavour.
Why has your dad had to have a major operation?
Because he had lung cancer, caused by smoking.
What are you thinking when you look at that?
He's changed. His hair, the way he looks happy there.
If you want to stop smoking, call 0800 169 0169.
Worried that your coloured hair has lost its softness and shine? New Dove Hair Silk nourishes your hair deep inside and leaves it as soft and shiny as the day it was coloured. New Dove Hair Silk revives coloured hair.
It was one of the biggest vaccination scares of recent times. If you knew what we now know, you may have acted differently. Dispatches, MMR, What They Didn't Tell You, Thursday at 9 on 4.
I wanted to know exactly how Jim's ideas, and ideas in general, float throughout the US Army until they become something like policy. Jim says it's rarely as simple as a commander giving an order. It's more like folklore, he says, or mythology.
Mythology has its power as a seed crystal. When I produced the First Earth Battalion Field Manual, which had 125 basic technologies in it, that the Army printed this document, and then the most creative leaders in the Army heard about it, because they all function in a network, you know, heard about it, took the manual, and literally used it like a catalog.
I was actually in the headquarters in Arlington, the U.S. Army INSCOM, Intelligence and Security Command headquarters at the time. And I heard about it about the same time everybody in the United States Army heard about it. No, somebody said, "Did you hear about the First Earth Battalion?" And I said, "The what?" And they said, "This guy, Shannon, just gave a paper at West Point, and you gotta read this paper. It's incredible." And I read it, and it just touched me. And I think it touched everybody that read it.
That's what the First Earth Battalion actually did, is give the rest of the Army Officer Corps and scientists the chance to think the unthinkable, meaning get out of the box, and then get out of the box, and then get out of the box.
It affected a lot of the command structure. And so a lot of people started thinking, particularly in the special ops area.
At Fort Bragg?
Yeah, well, at Fort Bragg and special forces type units. How could we apply this?
Jim's most fruitful idea was that Army scientists should journey to the wildest corners of their imaginations, be unafraid of seeming harebrained and half-baked in their pursuit of a new kind of weapon, something cunning and big-hearted and non-lethal.
Colonel John Alexander, as a function of being a member of the First Earth Battalion, introduced Los Alamos National Laboratories to the whole notion of non-lethal weapons. And now it's gone, you know, that spectrum of tools is just increasing by the day.
If we have an intruder, this is what we'll do. We'll net them.
John Alexander is the pioneer of strange and exotic military machines, such as the electric belt. I know that Colonel Alexander was inspired by the First Earth Battalion.
Heavily.
Yeah.
He's come up with some pretty wild stuff. A lot of it's probably classified.
Sticky foam.
Oh, that's another one, yeah. The sticky foam stuff.
And that was a John Alexander.
Yeah, that's a John Alexander invention, yeah.
He basically invented the field, gave it presence, began to sort out how it could be used and helpful, and continues to advise the Chief of Staff on its development.
Some of Colonel Alexander's great non-lethal advances in recent years have been in the field of acoustics, like the blast wave projector and the curdler unit.
Acoustics have actually, there's a couple of companies that have made some pretty big leaps. American technology now has an acoustic system that you can reach out with an acoustic beam up to a mile. As you get in, there is a switch, they can turn it up, and the power level gets extremely intense.
You are in a U.S. Army restricted zone. The use of deadly force is authorized in this area. Depart the area immediately or we will...
Jesus, Carl, that's horrible. There's a similar military machine in development called the active denial system, which blasts a long-range energy beam instead of a piercing sound.
Having been zapped by one of the prototypes, I can say it's a one-term learning experience. It hurts a lot.
Back in the 1980s and early 90s, the problem for fans of Jim's ideas was that there was nobody suitably wicked out there to test them out on. The Cold War was over, and these were the fallow years, so they had to test them out on each other instead. But then a golden opportunity arose in the form of a congregation of somewhat whacked-out Seventh-day Adventists, whose leader, David Koresh, was selling weapons illegally, and so the government went in. I think a dissection of what happened at Waco during the 51-day siege that followed will help to explain what happened in the shipping containers in Guantanamo Bay 10 years later.
I'm the kind of guy that I'll stand in front of a tank, you can run over me.
Can I have some ice cream?
A little bribery there. You know, right now you're considered a big terrorist, you know, and you can demand some important things like an ice cream or something, you know, maybe they might adhere to you.
The people within the church were somewhat alarmingly of one mind, David Koresh's mind. The people on the outside were even more alarmingly of no cohesive mindset whatsoever.
Next, we have a couple of Kansas City's finest members of the SWAT team. This one here is quite a specimen. I tell you, in all my years involved with SWAT, I've never seen a gentleman like this that I've learned so much from in just the short time I've been around him. It's just awesome is about the only word to describe him.
Honed to a fine edge, honed to kill.
That's right. He just Rambo. He's just like Rambo out here himself.
The church was surrounded by scores of soldiers and agents from different parts of the intelligence communities, each with their own idea about how to direct the siege. Those who were inspired by Jim Channon's First Earth Battalion, or inspired by people who were inspired by it, had to bide their time and wait for their turn. But then they got their chance.
They would do things like play sound tapes of rabbits being slaughtered or Nancy Sinatra singing songs, and then they would bring out lights at night, and not that Nancy Sinatra always was that bad, but the ones that she had kept. The point was this: they were trying to have sleep disturbance, and they were trying to take somebody that they viewed to be unstable to start with, and then they were trying to drive him crazy, and then they get mad because he does something that they think is irrational.
Maybe the agents thought that the lyrics to this song would persuade David Koresh to surrender.
You keep playing where you shouldn't be playing. And you keep thinking that you'll never get burned. Ha! I just found me a brand new box of matches, yeah. And what he knows you ain't had time to learn. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Yes, right here.
Mr. Ricks, is there a consideration to use psychological warfare? Have you discussed it at all?
I don't know what psychological warfare is.
It was reported in the paper that you would play loud music, keep bright lights on the compound all night to try to agitate the entire group. Is that a possibility?
We will not discuss tactics of that sort, but I would say the chances are minimal of doing that type of activity. Yes, ma'am.
There were the sounds of dying rabbits, dentist drills, helicopter rotor blades, and sirens. These ideas had been floating around like folklore for decades. Suddenly, for the first time in the agents' careers, they had the opportunity to put them into practice. The Branch Davidians were guinea pigs, a captive audience. Everyone thought this was all just about sleep deprivation, but I'm not so sure.
About 50,000 volts, about 26 watts. It's the first non-lethal device that we've seen that's truly incapacitating. It's as close to incapacitating as anything we've ever seen.
This is Commander Sid Heal. He's great friends with the First Earth Battalion's Colonel Alexander and calls him his mentor. After the Colonel, Sid is America's leading exponent of exotic, non-lethal technologies. Sid doesn't believe that the various incidents of musical torture we've looked at are about something as banal as sleep deprivation.
I mean, sleep deprivation may be part of it, but there's easier ways of doing sleep deprivation than going to all those great lengths. And so as a result of that, my guess is, just from what you're describing, is that it's got some deeper hidden effect.
And there was a young soldier standing with a really bright light that he was flashing on and off into the shipping container. It was night, really bright light that he was flashing into the shipping container.
Sid Heal thought about Barney for a while, the flashing lights, the repetitive music, and then he said he thought he had the answer. He said it must have been the fabled Booker effect.
Back in the 1950s, when helicopters were crashing for no apparent reason, he was assigned to find out, hey, what's going on? The pilots that were surviving were describing feelings of nausea and dizziness and vertigo just before they lost control of the helicopter. What Dr. Buca found out was that the rotor blades were strobing sunlight. And when it reached approximation of human brainwave frequency, which is roughly 0.3 to 30 hertz, it was interfering with the brain's ability to send correct responses to the rest of the body.
Sid says that for years, military scientists have tried to find a way of replicating the feelings of debilitating nausea suffered by the helicopter pilots in the late 1950s. The quest for the Booker effect, Sid says, is the holy grail of the non-lethal world. So this technique of the flashing lights and the music and so on could be hitting people on that level, on almost psychic level.
That's my guess. It'd be the ultimate non-lethal.
It's trying to get them to talk in a what's the word?
Well, psycho-spiritual dimension. If you use, because we are made up that way, besides basic fear of being hit, we are also have a mental, spiritual, and psychic component, so why not use that?